Hello and a very warm welcome to the first Talking Europe of 2017. Another year over, a new one just begun, but what kind of year will it be for the EU? 3, maybe 4 of the 6 founding countries are gearing up for elections. In all 4, anti-EU, anti-establishment parties are gaining ground. Nationalism is rising as the EU struggles to find common answers to economic stagnation or refugees arriving. Terrorism is also weighing on European minds. The Netherlands will go first with general elections in March, France follows with presidential polls in April, and Germany is to vote in the fall. In between, we could see snap elections in Italy. So what does the year ahead hold? Well, to give us their expertise, we're joined in studio by Ms. Pascale Joanna, Managing General of the Robert Schuman Foundation. The other side of the table, we have Yves Bertoncini, Director of the Jacques Delors Institute, and also we have Mr. Guillaume Closa, Founding President of Europa Nova.
Hello.
Thanks to you all for joining us. Mr. Closa, perhaps I will start with your good self. 2016 was a pretty miserable year for the EU. We had more attacks, we had more economic stagnation, we had the UK deciding to leave. Any reason to hope that 2017 will be a better one?
Well, at the end of the day, you remember we said that after Brexit, many states would like to leave the EU, and at the end of the year, nobody asked to leave the EU. So I would say this is already a good news for last year. And what we see is there is a common understanding that the EU needs to be relaunched with clear priorities and that we need to involve better citizens. The question is who to take the lead, and at the moment it's not very clear. With a certain number of opinion makers, we have launched a citizen movement within the EU, and we have dozens or thousands of people who want to go ahead and to find solutions together. And there is a real place for citizens to go ahead.
Okay, so a new energy. Mr. Bertoncini, we mentioned there, that people we didn't see calls for an exit, a Frexit immediately after a Brexit. However, this is the year that those countries are gearing up for elections. The Netherlands, topping their surveys, their polls, is anti-Islam, anti-EU, anti-establishment Geert Wilders. Are you surprised by the rise in his and other parties like him?
Not really, and it's both for domestic reasons all the time. You're right to say that it's an anti-system vote in the Netherlands. The same was true in the UK, in the USA, we may say, in France as well, because some countries of the EU are not well managed. I mean, there's an insatisfaction in a context, a European but also an international context of crisis, economic and financial crisis, but also geopolitical crisis, migration crisis, in which it appears that not only the EU, but the founding members of the EU, the founding elements, which are the heads of states, and then the governments of some national member states, did not behave well. So there's an insatisfaction toward them, not everywhere. I think in Germany, Mrs. Merkel is likely to be re-elected as chancellor, but it's true that in many member states, there is this insatisfaction. And then the EU cannot be really strong if the main member states of the EU are weak.
So, Ms. Pascale Joanna, do you think then the EU needs to have some kind of, because where does it break down between the national sovereignty of the EU member states and the EU in general? If we have, EU states that are failing to keep their people happy, what control can the EU have? It's having a direct effect on the EU.
The main mistake is that the member states think they are more relevant than the EU. And due to the current situation of the problem we have to face, migration, security, terrorism, we can't fight alone. And we have to make some improvement of international cooperation and European cooperation. And the European is weak because there is if it is not a state. And some member states, France first and others, think they are more relevant than the EU.
So the system is failing. The EU and the member states, they're not working to the same goal, Mr. Closa.
No, but I think there is one fundamental thing. The EU was created 60 years ago in order to create a context for long-term growth. And the context has completely changed. We have new challenges, and these challenges are not at the core of the competencies of the EU. And there is a need for a European action on this issue, which are transnational issues, defense, terrorism, migration, sustainable development, etc. And we need to adapt the European system in order to face that. And for me, there is an opportunity because the election of Donald Trump and the Brexit create also a new context. We consider very long that we were under the umbrella, the protection of the US. we saw that this is
In
going
defense, it looks like the EU is-
to disappear. For that, we see that many European member states want to go ahead with regard to a European defense policy. There was some French and German proposal on the table which have been approved, and somehow it was a surprise. We are aware that we need to have a new external economic policy, because what Trump is going to do, if he does what he has promised with regard to huge public deficit, with regard to reducing tax for companies in the US, is going to destabilize the European economy.
You mentioned there are two concerns really for EU
example,
citizens,
but I can-
terrorism and economics.
And jobs behind that.
Let's break them down bit by bit and look at terrorism perhaps first and foremost, because terrorist attacks like the one in Berlin just before Christmas boosted the anti-EU groups calling for more control of their national borders. They want to end immigration, they want to end Schengen, a lot of them, and take their country out of the EU in a form of protection. German Chancellor Angela Merkel says she believes the German people's compassion and cohesion give reason for hope, but as Haxi Myers-Belkin tells us, terrorism is also going to make her campaign for a fourth term a little bit tougher.
By her own admission, 2016 has been a year marked by a series of severe tests. The German Chancellor using her New Year's address to reflect on the ongoing threat Islamist terrorism poses to German society.
Yes, it is particularly bitter and sickening when terror attacks are committed by people who claim to seek protection in our country. With their actions, these people have made a cruel mockery of our generous spirit, just as they make a cruel mockery of those who truly need and deserve our protection.
Angela Merkel's so-called open door policy for refugees has earned her as many critics as it has supporters. Over 1 million migrants entered Germany in 2015 after Merkel insisted the country could handle it. And then there's the spike in Islamist attacks on German soil. In July, a man pledging allegiance to the Islamic State organization injured people with an axe on a train in Würzburg. 1 week later, an IS bomb went off in Ansbach, injuring several more. And on the 19th of December, 12 people were killed when Anis A. rammed a truck into a Berlin Christmas market. Merkel has said she'll be running for a fourth term as Chancellor in an election due to take place in September. She expects it to be her toughest campaign yet.
Mr. Bertuccini, let me come back to you. Looking there, a lot again of those nationalist parties want the control of the borders. They really feel that the governments across the EU have failed in a way to keep their citizens secure. How do you see the border situation? If we brought back internal borders, would that make people safer?
Absolutely not. But I observed Germany's reaction. And more precisely, Angela Merkel's reaction. She did not blame Schengen. We don't stop terrorists at the borders. We should act at source. And it's true to say that this terrorist threat is part of a more global agenda as regards collective security, which is a game changer for the European construction. Because the Europeans don't feel secure. There are terrorist attacks, but there's also Putin's aggressiveness in the east. There is an instability in Syria, in Iraq. And it's even more acute as a question than we have now Donald Trump. And we are not really sure that NATO, led by Trump at the west and Erdogan at the east, is an alliance able to protect us. And then, yes, this is a game changer for the Europeans. Either they want to get rid of any international cooperation, they want to be protected behind their national borders. But, it doesn't protect them really. It's an illusion. And at least Angela Merkel does not try to say this. Or they say, well, unity makes us stronger. We are stronger together. We need to spend more. And that's what have been said in Germany, in France.
Mr. Klose, is that part of the problem? You mentioned earlier, the Europe, it's only 60 years, 60th anniversary in March. Is part of the problem is we haven't planned Europe for these kind of situations, for common security, for, anything more than the economic side of things? Are we just coming up to date with our reality?
Europe is a permanent challenge, so we need to adapt it to new reality. It's true that for the last 10 years, the geopolitical context has completely changed. And that now around Europe, everything is dangerous, and that our historical allies, such as the US and such as Turkey, are changing their strategy. So indeed, there is an opportunity for us to have a real European policy, and we started to think. On the one hand, we need to be clear that the internal frontier issue is not the real challenge. And just to give you an example, remember the 70s. We have terrorist attacks everywhere in Europe, in Italy, in France, in Ireland, in the UK, in Germany, in the Nordic country. And people were crossing over the frontier, and we had strong internal frontier.
So yeah,
and so
protected things.
but we need to explain. And the second thing is we have started to work with two things. First, we have, for the first time, a real European frontier policy, which is starting last year in December. And secondly,
mostly in reaction to
we
the
have
refugees
a beginning
arriving.
of agreement on a defense strategy with an R&D defense industry policy, or a start, at least at the Franco-German level, which is a good step because it was not possible 2 or 3 years ago. But now we need more ambition and we need more leadership.
Ms. Joannan, you mentioned it there. There's an opportunity if the EU takes it. Do you have doubts about the willingness on a
yes,
on a group level?
Yes, because we've seen from many years that when they meet together, the head of states and government don't take the good decision, and there is no real opportunity to make step forwards. It is little steps, little steps, little steps. It's the reason why some populist movements are increasing. I agree with Guillaume. There was defense improvement, but we know that there will be no European defense tomorrow because it was a big movement.
No, and there
and
are
for
some neutral
terrorists,
countries
it's
that-
now because the terrorist attack is now.
Mr. Brucci, how do we solve problems like that? Getting all heads of state on the same page, agreeing first and foremost, and then acting on what they agree on.
Well, they decided to agree in Bratislava and then to meet again in Malta and then in Rome in March. We will see what they will deliver. But at least there's a new context, a geopolitical context, which is very different. I mean, of course, there are populist parties, extremist parties, presenting the EU as a threat. But there are also many other threats around us. And I've mentioned the security threats. You could also add the climate change and fiscal tax evasion, many threats to our system. Then, can the EU be an answer to these threats? And I think the context has changed because precisely our protection was made by the United States of America, and it's not
changed.
sure any longer. So Europe can be seen as an answer to these threats if the heads of states and government are able to commit.
The other thing a lot of people, though, are concerned about in the EU is the economy. We could see Italy going for general elections. We saw in the referendum at the end of last year, how Italians really weren't happy when Matteo Renzi proposed reforms. A lot of people were voting against him when they rejected his reforms to the constitution. Italy struggling very badly economically. A lot of anti-Euro parties there that could get into power if they hold general elections. That would it not be pretty disastrous, Mr. Klose, for the EU?
Yeah, of course, but up to now, Italy is not managed by people who are anti-European.
But does Brussels need to be more flexible on economic rules, on help their national governments?
No, but I think there is more flexibility. The economic and financial context framework has been adapted, and we need to go on this adaptation. We need to finish to complement the banking union, and we need to give a real support to the country who are attacked by what we call an external shock. So that's clear. After, Italy has specific issues to manage. Some of them are not European at all, and they have to manage it. And they have very long-term economic reform which has not been completed. There is a specific need for financial support in order to transform and to support banks in Italy. Italian government was allowed to do it. So that's a good thing. But the real need is much higher, and there is, for me, a need of systemic reform of the financial sector, of the banking sector in Italy.
Okay. Ms. Joannin, you agree? You think that on an EU level we need to give more leniency to countries that are struggling, or it's up to national governments?
I think the government are here and they are elected, so they have to be working on day-to-day job and to-day basis. But at the end, we know that the relevant answer is at the European level. But the decision is not always at the European level. And when we see, and I agree with Yves, there is international threats. But the European Union is very weak in this situation because we are not a state. So there is the United States changing with Trump, and we don't know how it will be working. We have Russia, and with strong leaders, we are very we want to be the leaders of the world today. We have China with the
you think
supermarket.
we need more EU.
And we have Turkey and other member states. And Europe is a huge places, very, very huge places. But when we see the broadcast, we don't see Europe because there is no representation of union at the international level.
We need a remarketing, perhaps,
Yes.
on the
And we are not weak. We are the first GDP of the world. We are the first commercial powerful.
So we should be, there should be more.
Industrial export.
Yes, but we are.
Mr. Bertuccini.
Yeah, very briefly, Jacques Delors would say that the EU is a federation of nation states. So two things. If the nation states are weak, and Italy is a bit weak, I mean, of course, the federation cannot be that strong. But there's something else, which is to find the sense of unity for the federation. And I think we will see what will be delivered in Rome. In this new geopolitical context, which can be an opportunity, I agree with Guillaume and Pascal on this, to relaunch the European project on new bases and more precisely on collective security basis.
Okay, well, that sounds like it's quite a positive note to end this half of the show on, and we'll see what comes at that Rome anniversary, which will be at the end of March. That brings us to the end of the first half of the show. Thanks to all our guests, and thanks to you at home, but do join us again after the news. We'll be talking to Flemish-Belgian author and poet David van Rijbroek. He says that in the EU we're suffering from democratic fatigue syndrome and that the EU could be over within a year. But don't despair, he may have part of the solution. Tune in after the news.